Good morning. I thought I'd have fun answering my dear friend who's can't wait for me to join my family in hell, burning alive forever. Uh, let's see. So I posted a video um, against a critic who, with about 2 minutes of reviewing their statement of faith, I was pointing out their inconsistency and that they should probably not criticize people that are being more consistent with the same sort of theological basis of them. And instead, the Catholic should have, is commenting how seemingly gleeful they are that Protestants are church hopping and whatnot. And so that's not wrong per se, it seems like. They ought to focus more on why they're Protestant, not Catholic. I try to tell people. So many people are like, oh, it doesn't matter. It's like, look, the Pope is either the head of the universal church on earth and speaks for Christ on earth, if their claims are true. So let me just point this out. You can't be neutral on that. The Pope is either what he claims to be and what the Catholic Church says in their documents, or he's not. And because of his statements, if he's not what he claims to be, I don't care what some people say now. The Catholic Church is so messed up, like they can't even decide if they follow the Pope or not. Oh, he's not speaking ex cathedra. Wasn't that nice? Does that mean, so shall we just, is that taqiyya he's operating under, like the Muslim idea that people always complain about? Well, what he's saying isn't true unless it's ex cathedra. Oh, like, if I was like, I get the distinction because you got to cover up for the fact that he doesn't actually speak for God. So when he says something you don't like later, you can say, well, it was an ex cathedra, or that's not an official Vatican source. We just have a million sources that everyone says are fine until someone points something out. Then we say, oh, that's not enough. They're just like, that's not even an official Adventist source. Oh, really? It was a cardinal that said it. Yeah, but I mean, that was 150 years. Are you saying your sources are garbage? Are you saying your institutions are garbage and they don't speak for the church, but you don't take them down? This is like throwing up a smoke screen so you can get out of anything. Answering Adventism. No, this is what's funny. Answering Adventism was an Adventist. Now, Ellen White predicted that Protestants would eventually reach over the Gulf or whatever and grasp hands with Rome. Do you know when she said that, she was mocked when she said that because of how insanely ridiculous that would be for that to happen. That could never happen. That's ridiculous. Protestants and Romans getting, like, they didn't let, I mean, I think around that time or shortly before that, historically, they didn't let Jesuits come in knowingly to America. You should see some of the quotes about Jesuits from American presidents, like Abraham Lincoln. The idea that such a prediction would be true when she said it was outrageous. Now we have Answering Adventism showing that to be true, saying Seventh-day Adventists are not, you can't be saved as a Seventh-day Adventist. It has a false gospel. As he calls an apostate Protestant who now prays to Mary and accepts the Catholic Church as the official church of history. And I'm not, it's like whatever, okay? But my point is, this Miles, who's a Presbyterian, claims Adventists aren't Christian. And he calls someone like that, because he's anti-Adventist, brother. Calls a Catholic someone who's refuted Protestantism, speaks against it, supports the Catholic Church, does the doctrines that in Miles' own confession, at least historically, they've modified it. They've taken that the Pope is the Antichrist out of their confession, the Presbyterians now. But most Presbyterians still basically have that understanding of Protestant history where all the Protestants agreed. And I'm just curious, which goes back to what I first said before I get into this quote. pretty much read any Protestant, Wesleyan, Presbyterian, Catholic, Anglican, all of them. They all read their commentaries in 2 Thessalonians 2. They all said the Antichrist was the Catholic Church. All of them. Like all of them. Now, here's my question. As people make Ellen White's prophecy come true that every Protestant laughed at when she said it, and now it's totally just absolutely 100% reality on official levels and the lay level, as we can see by Miles, whose colors are literally the colors of the harlot on his YouTube channel. I'm so curious if he did that on purpose. I doubt it. And by the way, the colors of the harlot church, the woman riding the beast, which that fourth king beast in Daniel is Rome, and the woman is a harlot, and a woman in the Bible is how God refers to like his people. So it's like an apostate woman, a prostitute. So it's an apostate group of church, apostate group of God's people, just like with in the Old Testament when the like calling them a harlot, fornicating with other gods, etc., etc. The imagery of a virgin bride and a harlot. Okay, that's not just random. So we have a great apostasy that would occur in the New Testament period of a harlot woman who's drunk on the blood of the saints. And if you're a Protestant and you believe righteousness and justification by faith is actually the gospel, which Adventists also believe, by the way, those of you who say we're heretics but Catholics aren't, if you're going to go there. If you believe, whether you be a Calvinist, a Wesleyan, an OSAS advocate, a sloppy gracer, the fact that you've had the Bible to invent your ridiculous theology available to you so that you could do that, and so that we could have religious freedom in America, speaking historically, and so that you could have the Bible in your language collecting dust on the shelf or being filled with highlighter markings, if that's your bag. The fact that you can make up your own theology and follow it or not and claim you're saved and all of that is possible because of the Reformation and what happened because of the Reformation. The Reformation had been stifled. You wouldn't be in the position to hold the theological position you do, even if you hate Calvinists. Okay, you should kiss the grave of John Calvin. You should kiss his ring because of that, even though he didn't necessarily do anything for that, but he's part of that process, that theology that came out of that. So, the Pope is either the Antichrist or he isn't, because of his own claims. It's not just me saying that. I'm saying the Pope claims to speak for Christ and be the leader of the church on earth. And so when he speaks, he's speaking for God. That's the claim. The one true and only apostolic church. They say that, not me. Now, they're either correct or they're not correct. There's no middle ground there. Those claims that they make are either true or not true. And so you can pretend like you're playing the neutral ground and you don't want to take a position on it. But that's just denying history. So you either agree with that or you don't. If you do agree with it, then you would be a Catholic, because you would need to be to receive grace to be saved based on those claims. If you don't agree with that, then you're thankful for the Reformation, because it's why you can believe what you believe and have that thing you think is true that the Catholic Church would have loved to stop from happening. Okay. And if they had succeeded, you wouldn't have the faith you do. Now, if that is true, and it is, then he is the Antichrist by definition. Okay. There's no middle ground there because of his own claims. So tell me, now, did Ellen White's prediction come true that everybody mocked her for saying at the time? Because no one ever thought that would be possible, that the Catholic Church would make friends with Protestants before the end. Okay. They laughed at her. Now, we have people like Presbyterians taking out of their confession the fact that the Pope is the Antichrist. They remove that part out of the confession. And we have Presbyterians calling Catholics brother and Adventists not brother. in fact, a false gospel, but they're cool with that. I mean, the harlot's colors are this. By the way, the woman riding the beast, that's a harlot that's drunk on the blood of the saints. She's described as having the same colors as the priests of the Old Testament priests, only it's missing one of the colors. The Old Testament priests were scarlet, purple, and sometimes it's mentioned gold, and blue. The harlot woman, I think 4 times in the New Testament, this woman who rides the beast from Daniel, is just scarlet, gold, and purple. No blue. What does the blue represent? Well, let me put it this way. The blue was the color of the original 10 Commandments, which was carved out of the pavement of God's throne on Mount Sinai, which is the color of sapphire, the color of the sky, semi-transparent. God cuts the 10 Commandments out of that, and hands them to Moses. Then Moses breaks them, and he goes back up and he makes a new set that God writes again, only Moses cuts the rocks from just the mountain. When the guy broke the Sabbath and they didn't know what to do with him, and they asked God, and they they executed the guy, that was what triggered them to invent the tzitzit on the edge of their garment, which was a blue tassel of thread that would hang off the corner of their garment to remind them to remember the Lord's commandments. Blue thread was used to bind the breastplate of the high priest, etc., and it was used all over the place. Okay, that's missing with this harlot woman, this final enemy of God's people. Okay, in the book of Revelation, it's another attribute, which also seek to change God's times and laws, speak blasphemy against the Most High, sit in the temple of God. All the Protestants agreed with that. Now they're taking it out of there. So you tell me what that suggests. It's really interesting to me. Okay, so let's see. This comment. This is interesting. They're just kind of reveling in the fact that, the Catholics have said if you're going to be a Protestant, you should be an Adventist. There's Catholics that would say that because of what happened at Council of Trent. If you're going to say you're going to follow the Bible and not the Pope, why are you keeping Sunday, which is an institution of the Roman Church, by her authority, ecclesiastical authority? And by the way, here's the question for people who people run around saying, "Oh, the Adventists are so dumb. They say that, the Pope changed the Sabbath." Well, they claim to do it. Now, here's the question: who did it? How did it get changed? The early church kept the Sabbath. The New Testament shows them keeping the Sabbath if you actually read it carefully. Even Catholic theologians agree with that. They at least used to want to actually, they're usually actually, the theologians are fine with this. Maybe not lay people who are trying to defend the Catholic Church and not give any ground on this. But when you actually read what they say, they totally willingly admit it. When you read the interactions in scholarship from the different Protestants and evangelicals and Catholics, all the Catholics love Bacchiocchi's work, where he was allowed by the Pope into the archives, which is no longer possible. And he wrote his dissertation on the change of the Sabbath in the late 70s. And the Pope awarded him I forget what they call it, but like the top honor for his dissertation. The Catholic theologians love his theory because it shows that the Catholic Church had the authority to make the change. Who else could do such a thing? And so, but Protestants will be like, "Oh, but it's not like people were all keeping the Sabbath and then the Pope changed it." Right. That doesn't, the point is the church, when it had power, officially did change it, which was an official change that you couldn't do it anymore. You couldn't, to not Judaize. That was the Catholic Church that did that to the ecclesiastical power. I mean, it didn't actually change because the Pope doesn't have that authority, but that's how it happened historically and cemented it historically. So it is a fact that is what happened. It just depends on what you think that means exactly. So, that's just a historic fact. Let's see. So this Catholic person, I think, asks me, exactly when do you think Christ abandoned the Catholic Church, which he instituted? So I don't think the Catholic Church, so you mean capital C Catholic Church. So I would say the church, I mean, the church was accreting all this garbage, over time. So it's hard to say exactly when I would distinguish the Roman Catholic Church, let's say, from sort of the universal church in the early. I know this: Peter wasn't the first pope. It's a ridiculous myth that we just know is just, it's a, I don't even know where to start with that. Like, that's just obviously not historically true. Even Catholic theologians admit this, depending on how crazy they are, or how much they're drinking the Kool-Aid. But most scholars worth their weight aren't gonna say ridiculous stuff because they won't get any respect in their field. So when did he abandon? When did he abandon the Catholic Church? I don't think the Catholic Church ever was the church. I don't think the church is an institution in that way. Provide the chronology of where and when of each jump, where Christ kept jumping from one church to another until he landed on you, the SDA. So, I don't think he was in an institution in that way. He was in true believers, people, but through the Spirit. I don't think being a member of a particular organization makes you part of Christ's church. That's not the criteria. So that's just your way of looking at it. So I don't even know how to answer that question or what you would expect. I don't look at it like that. I can't wait. Don't avoid the question. This is a question you should have asked, and every follower of the SCA should get an answer to. So let's hear it. Please provide the list and the dates for all the churches you are wantonist Christ, the church hopper, has jumped to, since he apparently can't stay with one woman for very long. The woman idea would be, like, as you obviously know, is a concept of a collective group of people who are following Christ. I don't know. It's hard to say. It seems like ideas that the Roman Church is cemented into the church at large. It's hard to say. I don't think there's perfect church anywhere, unfortunately, because of that damage. None of the Protestants were Sabbath keepers nor taught Sabbath keeping. Okay, well, your Pope calls Sunday the Sabbath. What do you mean by Sabbath exactly? There's three positions: antinomian, seventh-day Sabbath, and Sunday Sabbath. Most of your Catholic apologists don't want to call Sunday Sabbath because they want to say, "Oh, we didn't change the Sabbath." This is the online apologists, right? That deny their statements of their popes historically. They want to say, "Oh, Sunday isn't the Sabbath. We didn't change the Sabbath. Saturday is the Sabbath day. Sunday is the Lord's day. We didn't change the Sabbath. We just said you don't have to keep the Sabbath anymore. And Sunday is part of the moral law now. But it's not the Sabbath, even though the Pope will refer to it as Sabbath. And even though Protestants do the same thing. And so we didn't change the Sabbath. Saturday is the Sabbath. We just instituted the Lord's Day and did away with the Sabbath. And you have to keep the Lord's Day now once a week. And if you don't, you're breaking a commandment and it's a sin." By the way, people who say that, read your own documents, please. Your church claims from way up top that it changed the solemnity to Sunday because of Jesus' resurrection. That's the claim. Get your act together here. So I'm not sure what you mean when you ask, no Protestants were Sabbath keepers. Is that you admitting that Saturday is the Sabbath against your own church's authority to change the solemnity to the, or is that just colloquial? You call Sunday the Sabbath? Because read your own catechism. But I think is what you're saying is seventh-day Sabbath is what you mean correctly, right? Because Saturday is the Sabbath. Yes, I agree. That's what you're saying, right? And people say this to me all the time. I'll play stuff from Sunday Sabbatarian Protestants. I'll play it from anybody who argues rightly from uh, the institution of the Sabbath, like most of the Protestant confessions, that the Ten Commandments, both the Catholic Church, historic Christianity, and most Protestants, at least historically, understand obviously the Ten Commandments are unchangeable principles instituted in, uh, without the need of a command in Adam's day, which is the standard of righteousness. Because if you just logically think about it, obviously, like those things are just permanent. God institutes the Sabbath at the beginning. Most confessions will say something like the Sabbath was changed to Saturday or to Sunday because Jesus rose on it. And the Ten Commandments are binding for defining sin. The Catholics and the Protestants say this. So when they argue rightly about the validity of the principles of the Ten Commandments defining God's character and the idea of it being like having the category of moral law for all mankind because of the New Testament, Jesus, and the way God judged people in the Old Testament, and the existence of them being defined as sins when they were broken before the law was given at Sinai, and just what God would have expected if he's going to condemn Adam for disobedience, what's obviously inferred there. All those facts, like, to be honest with the text, while Sinai didn't codified the commandments at Sinai, but they're principles that are eternal. And the Sabbath is the only one that maybe not, I guess. But then God brings it up at the very beginning as being holy, set aside holy. And of course, so we know that God gave Adam the week, and he wouldn't have known what days a 7-day week were unless God told him that he had created him on the 6th day, because we see that way before Moses wrote in archaeology that they had a 7-day week, which isn't a natural phenomenon. So that would have had to come from God, like it says in the Bible. They even had a day that's like Sabbatu, right? So we know that it existed, and most theology or confessions of faith reflect that obvious fact, right? So most people will say, well, switch to Sunday at the cross. So they are Sabbath keepers classically, okay? Just not Saturday Sabbath keepers. So I don't care if they're not Sabbath keepers. If they make all the right arguments, they're only wrong about it being transferred. So I like to agree with people when they're right about stuff. I don't look to them as an authority. It's like Jesus said, do what they teach, not what they do, because they're hypocrites. If you teach all the perpetuity, the perpetuity of the moral law as classically described, that's obviously just logically and can be inferred from scripture, but it's one of the most logically obvious things possible. So that's why, I say it's in most theology, most different churches' theology. So just like when people say this to me, they're not Sabbath keepers. So why are you referencing them? Like, I can reference early church fathers, even if they didn't keep the Sabbath. Like, they'll say it. Like, I can show you Irenaeus. The Decalogue is eternal. Everybody said this historically from the earliest days on. Like, Jesus, we don't have to do sacrifices and this and that. But obviously the 10 Commandments are binding. Just look at the Sermon on the Mount. Look at Romans 13. Look at the book of James. Look at Revelation. The New Testament knows nothing about doing away with the 10 Commandments. Obviously, why would God do away with the 10 Commandments? That would be evil. They don't matter anymore. They aren't true anymore. So who cares if someone's a Sabbath keeper? That's like you get your authority from what people say, not the logic of it. Moreover, please state loudly to everyone that you agree and acknowledge that if you are wrong about eternal punishment, you fully understand that you will be tormented in hell for eternity, and also be personally responsible for all those who followed your heresy. First off, I'll say this. I take full responsibility for what I believe. And as I told you, I will, if you have children out there and I get a chance to talk to them when you're not looking, I'm going to try my hardest to get them to not agree with your bad interpretation of scripture, hoping that the next generation and all your grandchildren will rightfully proclaim to those who don't know God that he doesn't murder people forever, or that he doesn't torture people forever in fire, because men aren't gods and immortal. and that eternal life is only given to the saints. And by the way, I'm just joking. I would never get in between a parent and their kid, even if they're teaching them awful stuff. I would just, you know, try to change your mind. But I'm just trying to get under your skin a little bit because you're basically told me my family's burning in hell right now. But I get it. You're brainwashed by something that was never meant to be the faith. So I kind of feel bad for you. Um, some people would say I'm not doing a very good job of trying to reason with somebody, but look, man, I'm just going to tell you what I really think. You can appreciate that, or you can think I'm a jerk. But for someone to come and make comments like this on my channel, I would just say, I can relate to you because I get wigged out about stuff because I care about what I think is true or whatever. And I wish I wasn't that way as badly as I am. But on the other hand, if you just constantly pretend like you don't care, pretty soon you don't care anymore. I've been there before. So I'll just say this. I don't think people who get this wrong are going to be lost necessarily. So I don't think you're lost because you believe something insane like God tortures people forever, even though the Bible doesn't teach that. I don't think that means you're saved or lost because you get it wrong. And by the way, let's say hypothetically, eternal conscious torment is true. Okay. Let's just assume that's true. Is for a thought experiment. Even if it is true, people, I mean, no one really knows for sure, but it seems to me that it's more likely that people are turned off by that idea. We know this historically. Like, now people can be lying and just using it as an excuse, of course, but it seems equally likely to me that the idea that ridiculous idea, if that were true, like the idea that you could think to love a God that would keep you tortured forever, alive forever in torture, and then the claims about salvation in Christ and what he demonstrates, like what in his ministry on earth with lost people. The idea that he would torture somebody forever is like, it doesn't make any sense logically. So that's just as seems to me more likely that idea is has led more people from even beginning to think about the faith. Now, depending on your views about original sin, I know that may not be palatable, but even so, people, we all want to evangelize to people in appealing ways while being honest, right? So, like, if people think eternal conscious torment is true, they're going to sugarcoat it. I mean, everybody's like cringes when people go out there and they're like, God hates fags, man. What are you going to tell? Like, different Christians have different positions on that, and I think that's despicable to say that sort of thing. But I do think that's a sin, right? So how should I approach that? Should I go around? I mean, if we really had love for people and we thought that God was going to torture them forever, like, we'd be nervous wrecks if we actually loved people. We would just be, I mean, you'd be sweating bullets 24/7, wouldn't you? I don't think you really believe it. You know that? I don't think you actually believe it. Like when push comes to shove, there's no way that you could live that as if that were true. And if you could, you'd kind of be insane. Seem to be on that, and maybe you kind of are, right? Because you love telling me that I'm going to hell to burn forever. Because you've decided that I'm lying to people and they would have been warned if I had told them the truth. And so they're not going to be concerned about it. And so now they won't care. Because the gospel to you is saving people from eternal conscious torment, apparently. I just don't think that's true. But I do think people will miss out on eternal life, which is a travesty. Okay, so now consider, let's say you're wrong. Imagine you left your children to a babysitter, right? And while you were gone, they were telling your kids with a real serious look on their face, that if they don't do everything the babysitter is telling your kids, if you don't do everything I say, when your parents get home, they're gonna pour gasoline all over you and catch you on fire. And they're gonna cut your fingers off with the garden snips. And then they're gonna flip you upside down naked and put your head in the toilet and flush it over and over and over like a sort of poor man's waterboarding, right? They're gonna stick bamboo shoots under your fingernail. You better do everything I say. I'm the Pope. I'm the Pope while your parents are gone. You got to do what I say or I'll burn you alive. Or they'll burn you alive later, but I'll do it too. And then you get home from your date or whatever, and you walk into the house and your kids, like there's vomit all over the floor and they're white. One of them's passed out screaming and crying. The other one just looks like white as a ghost, just staring blankly. And you look at the babysitter and you're like, what the heck did you do to my kids? And they're like, nothing. I just told them. And then they tell you all the things that they said to your kids that you would do. Well, because you wanted to teach them to obey. I mean, I told your kids that you love them. Don't worry. I just was making sure that they obeyed me because, I wouldn't want to not threaten them with the most grievous and awful, sadistic threats in case they wouldn't obey me. How would you feel about that when you got home and heard that nonsense? What would you think? Now, imagine the babysitter wasn't strict enough because they didn't feel comfortable saying extreme things because they weren't sure exactly how strict you were as a parent. And so the kids get kind of sick because you let them eat too much ice cream, right? So they're kind of have upset stomachs and they can't go to sleep when you get home from your date. The babysitter says, "Well, I didn't know if you let them. They said you let them eat ice cream." And it's like, which parent would be more upset? The parents of the liberal sort of attitude of the babysitter, or the one that made these awful, ridiculous threats? What would irritate you more as a parent? That's my question. I mean, it's not a perfect analogy, and I'm not saying my view is the liberal view. I'm saying it's the biblical view, but from a neutral point of view, I think what you're doing, if wrong, is misrepresenting God on a far more profound level. Okay, so, but when it comes down to it, the fact of the matter is, your view is balderdash. It's made up. It's medieval garbage. It ain't true. The things that are entailed by that belief, to me, ought to be heresy, if anything's going to be called a heresy, because you're literally giving humans the attributes of God, historically anyways, especially Catholics. Man isn't immortal. Sorry, the Bible is crystal clear. And so the sorts of ideas that at least suggests that is going to happen is a bad reading of apocalyptic literature, a misunderstanding of what words actually mean, a destruction of like what the early church fathers actually believed with careful, good scholarship demonstrates. And so, and I'm going to get to that next here shortly, but yeah, that's the way it is. So the ideas that come in that should be obvious heresies. All this stuff about God's nature is important and all that, but if it's gonna insist that men have the attribute only afforded or only said God to be gods and Christ in the Bible, and then you make it something intrinsic in humans, that should be heresy. You're giving human beings an attribute of God that the Bible says God alone has. You're denying the clear imagery all through the prophets that God will actually remove pain and suffering and wickedness from his creation and ending sin. In hell, where there's eternal conscious torment, that means there's sin and sinners eternally existing in God's universe forever. There's rebellion against God perpetuated forever. You make humans into gods. You make God break his promise. I mean, that should be heresy, if anything. I mean, I'm not really down with the whole heresy, let's murder people by burning them at the stake unless they confess the right propositions. That's like once saved, always saved stuff, like, on steroids, a distraction from the work of God in people, thinking that they're following the faith because they affirm a proposition. Just today, we can't kill each other anymore, thank God, because of the Protestant Reformation. People don't murder each other anymore, in the West anyway. But let me point something out to you. Let's see. You're still going here? Okay, yeah. So I read this thing, your Pope, your very special guy who speaks for Jesus on earth, says apparently it says here on this National Catholic Register, that's the source here. I'm not sure how official that is or not. Maybe if you don't like what it says, you can say it's not an official source. On June 28th, the Catholic Church celebrates Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, who as a boy sat at the feet of Polycarp, taught by John. Early listening to the sermons of the bishop, disciple John. Let's see. Though he has been long considered an early church father, Pope Francis named him the 27th Doctor of the Church in 2022. That's official, right? If the Pope makes him an official doctor of the church, I mean, that's set in stone, isn't it? Right? Because the Pope declares who the saints are, right? Which means you can pray to them because the Pope tells you they're in heaven. So you can pray to them, even though that's an abomination. Pope Francis, I mean, seems to me. Pope, it's funny though, because of what Irenaeus believes, which I'll demonstrate in a second. So your Pope approved, and by the way, your Pope, I think, also said that I think my religion can get people to heaven, actually, recently, just so you know. Your guy who speaks for Jesus on earth said that I'm good to go, along with everybody else. Or I'm sure he thinks as long as you kiss his ring, that's the case. Ultimately, is what he's looking for here. He's looking to be that sort of leader of all the gods that so-called gods, as I think Daniel puts it. He'll do anything to get people to kiss that ring, won't he? Including saying atheists can be saved, homosexuals can be priests next, probably. Whatever it takes to be worshipped by everyone. Someone's got to be that last guy before Jesus comes back. Yeah, so Pope Francis made Irenaeus a church father, or a saint, I guess, or maybe this is something different. I'm not quite sure, but he made him an official doctor. It's been, finally, man, it's been like 1800 years. So we know Irenaeus is a good to go, but according to the Pope, so like you could even pray to him. Maybe ask him if this is the case or not next time you talk to him. I doubt it's actually him though, if you get any response. He said, listen to this, what Irenaeus said here. He says, okay, here, early church fathers. Let's see, do I have the source here? I think it's like, I'm not sure exactly where in his Against Heresies this is. I think it's like book 4, maybe. I can't remember. He says this. For some reason, I didn't put the citation here, but he says, if then the Lord observed the law of the dead, meaning the process of death, like what all people go through when they die, that he might become the first begotten from the dead, it's Jesus, right? And tarried until the third day in the lower parts of the earth, Ephesians 4:9. Then afterwards, rising in the flesh, so that he even showed the print of the nails to his disciples. He thus ascended to the Father. If all this is true, I say, how must these men not be put to confusion? These people, these heretics he's arguing with, the Gnostics is the context. These guys are, how are they not, if all that I just said is true about Jesus, then are these heretics not confused who allege that the lower part refers to this world of ours, but that their inner man, leaving the body here, ascends into the super celestial place? For as the Lord, now he clarifies what he's saying here. No, See, this is what people do. They'll take that last part I just said and say, well, we don't believe that exactly like that. But listen, this is the point here that he sums that up to put it what the problem with that is right here. Now listen, puts the two ideas together here. Think for yourself, not what the revisionists say that want to like argue that he believed all the Catholic doctrines, which is clearly false. Okay. Think for yourself. For as the Lord went away into the midst of the shadow of death, where the souls of the dead were, yet afterwards arose in the body, and after the resurrection was taken up into heaven, it is manifest that the souls of his disciples also, whose account the Lord underwent these things, shall go away into the invisible place allotted to them by God, and there remain until the resurrection, awaiting that event, the resurrection, then receiving their bodies and rising in their entirety, that is bodily, just as the Lord arose. They shall come thus into the presence of God, bodily, like Jesus. Now, people will try to twist this because they don't have reading comprehension. He's saying, look, your inner self doesn't go up to heaven because look how Jesus didn't go up to heaven until he rose bodily. Okay, that's what he's already saying. This is what Tertullian says. This is what Justin Martyr says. And this is what he's saying. And the heretic Gnostics that he's arguing with are the ones that believe like you do modernly today. The heretics that he's speaking against believe what you believe today. That's dogma in the Catholic Church. And he's saying these heretics, okay, that's what he says. These heretics don't realize that the saints have to go through what Jesus went through, that is to die and wait in the place of the dead until the resurrection from the dead, where they rise in their bodies, and in that way, like Jesus, enter the presence of God. That's what he's saying. That's what Adventists believe. You believe what he's arguing against, specifically. And the Pope just made him a saint or a doctor of the church, officially. That same leader that speaks for Jesus on earth that you worship also says, my tradition can get me to heaven, by the way. Not that I care. For no disciple is above his master, but everyone that is perfect shall be as his master, future tense, when they bodily are resurrected and come into the presence of the Lord, not getting to go ahead of going through what the master did. And he quotes Luke 6:40. As our master, therefore, did not at once depart, taking flight to heaven, but awaited the time of his resurrection prescribed by the Father, which had also been shown forth by the sign of Jonah, in rising after 3 days. As this is foretold about Jesus through the prophets. And so rising, be taken up. Oh, wow. Is that a rapture idea almost? His resurrection prescribed by the Father, which had been also shown forth through Jonas, and rising again after 3 days was taken up to heaven. So ought we also to await the time of our resurrection prescribed by God and told by the prophets. And so rising, be taken up, as many as the Lord shall count worthy of this privilege. Doctor of the church said that. He believes this Adventist heresy. Here's another thing Irenaeus said. The Pope's doctor of the church. This saint who said heretics believe you go to heaven before the resurrection has been sainted and theoretically taken into heaven, and thus has the status of one to be prayed for because they're alive in heaven, even though the man himself called that heretic, that a belief of what he's fighting in his against heresies. How ironic. So why do we know that Irenaeus believed like Adventists do, that there's a final permanent judgment that is annihilationism or conditional immortality? Well, because he said this in Against Heresies, book 2, 40, I don't know, I guess it's section 43, paragraph 3. He says this. And there's a second paragraph or second claim he makes in 319:1 in Against Heresies, okay? It is the Father of all who imparts continuance forever and ever on those who are saved. For life does not arise from us, not from our own nature, but it is bestowed according to the grace of God. Therefore, he who shall preserve the life bestowed upon him and give thanks to him who imparted it shall receive also length of days forever and ever. But he who shall reject it and prove himself ungrateful to his maker, inasmuch as he has been created and has not recognized him who bestowed the gift of life upon him, deprives himself of the privilege of continuance forever and ever. Continuance. Those who assert that he, Jesus, was simply a mere man begotten by Joseph, remaining in the bondage of the old disobedience, are in a state of death, having been not as yet joined to the word of God the Father, nor receiving liberty through the Son, but being ignorant of him who from the Virgin is Emmanuel, they're deprived of his gift, which is eternal life. And not receiving the incorruptible word, they remain in mortal flesh and are debtors to death, not obtaining the antidote for life. For it was for this end that the word of God was made man, and he who was the Son of God became the Son of Man, that man, having been taken into that word and receiving the adoption, might become the Son of God. Small s, Son of God. For by no other means could we have attained to incorruptibility and immortality unless we had been united to incorruptibility and immortality. Unless first incorruptibility and immortality had become that which we also are, so that the corruptible might be swallowed up in incorruptibility, and the mortal by immortality, that might receive the adoption of sons. So he's quoting same things an Adventist would regarding we're not immortal. That's a gift received at the coming of Jesus, according to 1 Thessalonians, which he is quoting. Like a good sola scriptura sort of guy, right? So, Saint Dr. Irenaeus, a doctor of the church, pupiled under Polycarp, who is under John the Apostle, says Adventists are right, and that Gnostics, heretics, believe what you believe. Just saying. And then your Pope says he's a doctor of the church. Wow. You might have to reevaluate your criticisms of Adventist theology, maybe. Because apparently someone can teach my heresies and be killed and be proclaimed a doctor of the church by the very mouthpiece of God on earth, who distributes the merits of the saints from the reservoir of merit. Interesting. Maybe you should go straighten the Pope out. I don't know. Seems like problematic, though, considering the position you claim the Pope has, that you would even think to do such a thing. But then again, you're not in line with what the Pope is saying. This Irenaeus fellow, practically an Seventh-day Adventist. He taught one of the heresies that we believe. That is, hell is a final destruction, that only the saints are gifted immortality because we do not innately have it, like the heretics think. And he doesn't believe we go to heaven, or obviously, inversely, that would suggest that you didn't go to hell either, because the judgment hasn't happened yet, which he also speaks to it in other places, which I won't go to yet now. But Tertullian definitely said that too. Of course, I think you guys think he's kind of a heretic, maybe, even though you acknowledge his work regarding development of the Trinity against heretics. So I won't bring that up. But Justin Martyr said similar things. If some man thinks he goes as a soul to heaven upon death for the judgment and resurrection, I wouldn't call that man a Christian, speaking of the Gnostics. People will say, well, we don't believe it exactly like the Gnostics. I know you don't. But the thing he's rebuking them for as a heretical belief is what the idea he says. And it's wrong for the reasons Adventists say it's wrong. And these are saints. So, despite popular belief that there was uniform belief in the early church, there wasn't. Men who dissented, even if there was, which I'm not acknowledging, I don't think there was in there at that time a majority of people who are saying what you're saying today, and these were outliers. I don't buy that. That's not actually accurate. In fact, I think they've been largely misread or read right through, not seeing the facts of the matter. And the Protestants are too afraid to see it because of what they were arguing against the papacy or the Catholic Church about. They did no work on developing doctrines about the intermediate state. They were just rebuking again, making bad arguments against purgatory. The early church fathers confused them, and the Catholic theologians made it seem like they were kind of talking about something like purgatory, when in reality they're not at all. It's more like the development of the current doctrine of the intermediate state and final punishment and judgment that's in the church now, quote unquote church, the Catholic Church or whatever. That's a development and a kind of an accretion of an idea that came out of not understanding what they were actually saying in these writings, and other ideas coming in like the immortal soul, mixing with trying to make sense of this language, which develops into ideas like purgatory and other weird ideas that are had through presuppositions that came in from Greek philosophy, mixed with not being then that being presupposition, trying to make sense of the stuff they're saying in light of that assumption or presupposition. Becomes these developments because people are all over the place not knowing how to make sense of it or how to read what they're actually saying. Like when I would say that with what they're actually, you have to like know what they're arguing against. And of course, I don't know it really well, but it looks like to me that sometimes when people think they're talking about something like an immortal soul, and there seems to be conflicting statements, is what they're really saying is they're arguing against Platonists who are against the Christian idea of a bodily resurrection, which is compatible with sort of an immortal soul or not anyway. And is what's going on is they're arguing that against this idea that, well, if you die, the resurrection wouldn't be a resurrection. It would be something like it wouldn't be the same person. So like ideas that were like Plato had about this and what people were arguing, they were defending the physical resurrection. So when they're talking about the soul not being totally like dead in the intermediate period, it sounds like they're saying the soul's like alive in some cases. I'm not arguing that they all believe the same thing. They were confused, I think. They were trying to defend the idea of the resurrection. And that's what they're really saying. They might really just be saying, the soul isn't gone, even though the person's dead, and there will be a resurrection in the future, and it will be that person. And so they're saying like that essence, just like I would say today, people will say, I think people are annihilated upon death, the first death. And it depends on what you mean. And people talk past each other all the time in the same way, where they say, well, I'm not saying they're gone for good. Jesus likened it to a sleep. And so I think a lot of times when they're arguing this way, they're really just arguing against people who say, well, if they're gone, they're gone. And it wouldn't be a resurrection of the person, right? And then people take that for them talking about a conscious intermediate state / an immortal soul. Anyway, I think that's a possibility in some cases with some of these writings that people read a different way, seems to me. So, but it's quite clear and obvious. I mean, think about Irenaeus, according to the Pope, is a doctor of the church. I'm sure you could pray to him or whatever, according to the Pope, which I don't recommend, but think about it. This is what he said. I'll read it one more time for you, just in case you think it's saying something different here. He said, regarding the resurrection or going to heaven when you die, he certainly didn't think that. The Gnostics thought that. And they said they were fighting the heretics for that reason. Okay. I wouldn't call somebody a heretic for believing false things about this. I would just say, I'm just saying that's what he's doing. not me. And so, for life does not arise from us. Well, you believe that, right? God made them immortal. It's not his point. Notice, it's bestowed according to the grace of God. And therefore, he who shall preserve the life bestowed upon him, that is, you following, obeying God, basically is what he's saying. Because recognizing that God bestows life in general to us, and you give thanks to him who imparted it, shall receive also length of days forever and ever. Now, well, okay, but the wicked will have length of days too. Okay, well then it's not being bestowed upon the one who follows God, is it? That wouldn't be a distinction. But now notice, moving on, keeping that in mind. But he who shall reject it and prove himself ungrateful to his maker, who granted him the ability to be a living creature, inasmuch as he has been created and has not recognized him who bestowed that gift upon him, that man deprives himself of that privilege and continuance forever and ever. Contrast. No continuance. The other person, because it is a gift of God, that he's saying you preserve your life by being grateful to God who granted it to you. And thus, if you do that, that is respect the one who imparted it. In other words, the gift that you have in this life, if you respect God for granting that to you, you will receive length of days without end, forever and ever. A continuance, which is deprived of the wicked for not being grateful to the one who gave them life in the first place. They will not have continuance forever and ever. But the gift bestowed on those who are grateful in their response to God will be bestowed length of days that don't end. So, very clear contrast. Conditional immortality, doesn't think hell is eternal conscious torment, doesn't think you go to heaven when you die. And he's a doctor, according to Pope Francis, who says Adventism is a way to heaven, unless he's lying. Maybe we should just take everything he says as a lie, unless he speaks ex cathedra. Let me know about that. I'm not quite sure. And again, I don't care how soon people stopped keeping the Sabbath. I just know the apostles didn't do away with the Sabbath. And the early church kept keeping the Sabbath. And maybe some people started keeping the Sabbath and Sunday at some point, although it's kind of foggy. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't really matter. Obviously, Jesus doesn't do away with the moral law, which every classical Catholic and historic sort of catechism recognizes. It's in your catechism, the 10 Commandments. But when it talks about the Sabbath, it means Sunday. But the principles of the moral law standing and defining sin is obviously true. So it doesn't really matter. The fact of the matter is, if people accepted the attempt to change it, they're just following the guide that Paul's talking about, is the great apostasy, the woman riding the beast, the fourth beast is Rome, the little horn from Daniel 7 is the leader of that apostasy, and he seeks to change God's times and laws. And he wears the colors of the high priests of God from the Old Testament, only he doesn't have the color blue, according as the way John depicts it in his visions. And the color blue represents the 10 Commandments, because they were written on blue, and they represent the law of God symbolically. And the blue tassels, were the seats that they put on their garments, was a reminder to remember the commandments of God, because the guy who broke the Sabbath was put to death because he was kindling a fire on the Sabbath. And so if everybody keeps Sunday because they follow after the Pope, who claims to be the leader of church that has the authority, and it's a mark of his authority, according to his own words, thinks he can change one of God's laws that has to do with time and honoring God as the creator, and that guy is missing the blue color. And Jesus says, because of lawlessness abounding, the love of many will wax cold, but he who endures to the end shall be saved. Pray your flight not come on the Sabbath day. And the saints keep the commandments of God and have the testimony of Jesus. And the beast power, that's a harlot woman that historically says they speak for God when they don't. says they can forgive sins, but they can't because only Jesus can. When they try to officially, as the leader of the church on earth, speaking for God, change one of God's commandments, which has to do with time. And so they seek to change times and laws because of their think they have that authority. That would be blasphemy. That would be seeking to change God's times and laws by that harlot woman who strayed from the truth as Jesus preached it from the word, became a harlot woman who rides the fourth beast, which is Rome, if Jesus is the Messiah, because that's the fourth kingdom when he shows up the first time. And the final message to the world in Revelation before Jesus returns says, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. Fear God, give glory. What is it fear God usually associated with? Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. What is the Antichrist? He's a replacement Christ, a counterfeit and a replacement. Where does this person sit? Well, it sits in the temple of God in the New Covenant period, which is the church. Did the papacy have civil authority for 1260 quote unquote days? Are the days of Daniel's 70 weeks years? Yes. Is the 1260 3.5 years on a lunar calendar? And a lunar calendar isn't the actual literal calendar in use in time and history? No. So therefore, that also should be interpreted as 1260 years because of the increments being symbolic in the way that they're written. Because 3.5 years is never written in the way it is in literal narrative. And it's a part of apocalyptic literature with symbols. And the 42 months is the 42 months is the 1260 days, which is 3.5 years in symbolic increments, which equal 1260 days, which are interpreted to be years. And what do you know after the things mentioned about the fourth kingdom going on through history in Daniel 7 and then picked up in Revelation 13, the church gets corrupted and seizes civil power, like the land beast sort of idea and the sea beast coming together sort of idea, like Behemoth and Leviathan, perhaps going against what Jesus plainly said in his interpretation of Matthew 13, when he says, when they ask him, should we pluck up the tares with the wheat? That would be like, should we, as followers of you, pluck out the seeds of the devil that are growing up with the wheat, which you're going to harvest at the end of the world? Should we pluck those up? What does Jesus say? And I'm just going about the interpretation that's given in the text. He says, no, don't pluck up the tares. Don't pluck up the heretics. Or you might pluck up some of the wheat with the tares. I will separate them at the end of the age, when he harvests the earth and presses the winepress of God. So a direct command of Jesus to not pluck up the heretics, the bad seed, because it'll cause wheat to be pulled up with them. That's what'll happen if you do that. And what does the Catholic Church do? It merges with civil power and kills heretics. And you love that, don't you? I don't know. You talk about, you seem to revel in the idea that I'm going to burn forever. If the church had the authority, if your church had the authority to threaten me with burning me at the stake to save my ever-loving soul by signing a document, I'd hope I'd be like the hero that made Protestantism possible and religious freedom possible in America. The hero who burned his hand for having recanted in the past. The heroes that had the strength to not recant their convictions as they burned alive, like your hero, sainted hero that the Pope made a saint, who tortured his victims, Thomas More, pervert, unbiblical, not following the teaching of Jesus in Matthew 13 explicitly because he served the Pope, and killed heretics and tortured them, burned them at the stake. I think that's a direct violation of Jesus' teaching. And I think, what do you know? The Catholic Church, in line with the historic flow of prophecy, gets obtained civil power and headship over the church falsely, because the early church did not have a pope. That's nonsense. Didn't happen. There is no such thing as papal authority as set up by Jesus. But when the church went astray, becoming a whore, she seized that civil power. What do you know? She had it for 1,260 years until Napoleon knocked the Pope off of his throne and threw him in the clinker where he died. And during that time, millions of people died because they were heretics. A direct violation of Jesus' teaching. I don't think Jesus was hopped into that church at that time, murdering heretics, going in direct violation of Jesus' teaching, which is a parable with the interpretation given in the text, by the way. And by the way, Jesus was sola scriptura in Matthew 15. Or maybe I'm thinking Matthew 15. When God himself is in person with the leaders of God's people on earth, who have the authority given them by the sovereign God, at that time, when God himself is in the flesh, telling these leaders appointed by God, allowed to be what they are because God put them there, he didn't even appeal to his own authority as leader of God's people when he was in the flesh. He said, "It is written, have you not read?" And Jesus, last I checked, is my example. So I'm going to follow Matthew 13. I'm going to believe prophecy. I'm going to despise people who burn people at the stake and and is drunk on the blood of the saints, who thinks they can change God's times and laws. And I'm going to say, no, thank you. And by the way, again, your leader, the Antichrist, in its position. I don't know about Pope Francis himself per se. Maybe he's going to be saved. I don't even know. But I know this, that seat of power and authority that's drunk on the blood of the saints is the Antichrist seat. And that's a fact.